I used to think my grandma's kitchen rules were old-fashioned and unnecessary, but since then I've had a family, I've been a nurse, I've retired, I've learned she was onto something big, that many things we have completely forgotten in our modern kitchens. And it wasn't until I started reflecting on my grandma's kitchen wisdom that I understood how much easier cooking and cleaning could be when you follow some simple time-tested rules. Let's start with something that might make you cringe a little bit. When was the last time you actually deep cleaned your range hood? Now I'm talking about really cleaning it and not just wiping the surface. So my grandmother's kitchen was so clean, not just surface clean, but deep clean. If it could get dirty, it got cleaned, which in the kitchen is pretty much everything, including little kids running through the kitchen after blissfully playing outside for hours in the dirt, which honestly is a good thing in my mind. But here's the embarrassing thing that made me finally tackle my range hood again recently. I was cooking one day and I noticed oil dripping onto the cooking surface, not the actual cooking part, but very close. And I'm thinking, what? Where did that come from? Only to look up and see that it was dripping from the range hood, which was covered in grease. Nothing says professional chef like grease stalactites hanging from your range hood. Not the seasoning I was looking for in my cooking, believe you me. Plus, the actual filters hadn't been cleaned in a while, which is horrifying. So you know you've been avoiding something when you need to Google how to remove range hood filters when you had done it before. Anyway, now I actually generally clean them about every 3 months because of that incident. But this week it was definitely time again to dive in. And what I do is I take the filters out and I soak them in the sink. I just throw a dishwasher tab in the sink and I let it dissolve. I let them soak for a couple hours, quickly wipe them off. Then I throw them in the dishwasher. While that is happening, I spray the whole range hood down with the Dawn Power Wash stuff, which is so good. And I just wipe away the grease. Tell me if there's anything so gross that you found when you weren't paying attention in your kitchen, just to make me feel better. So while I was at it, I cleaned the fronts of the cabinets and I got into those gross cracks between the floor and the cupboards. The kind of deep cleaning that Grandma did, just part of her regular routine. And I am glad to start putting that into my own routine. I also want to quickly talk about ovens. So I remember my grandma taking her oven racks out of the oven and she would soak them with spick and span in the bathtub. And I remember saying like, well, where did you get spick and span? And she was like, the dollar store. I was like, okay. So then she would scrub the oven. And you know the dangerous caustic burn your skin and lungs kind of oven cleaner? Yeah, it works really, really well. And here's something though that I love about my grandma and maybe yours, is that they would recognize that and decided not to use something like that because they were like, it's too caustic. I remember listening to my aunts and my grandma talk about why they didn't use bleach anymore because they didn't like what it did to their clothes. So one of the good options we have now with ovens is the self-cleaning option. And I honestly, I'm a little bit scared by that because they get so hot. I hate the smell, and it basically has to be a day that's kind of cool enough that it doesn't, like that you can cool the house down with all the windows open, but not so cold that you're like freezing yourself off. So it's just, it's something, you need to keep the windows open. It's been a while since I've done that. My main thing is like trying not to let it get too dirty, but that is another tip grandmas do about cleaning the oven. So this is crazy and I feel so bad, but when I was a kid, I didn't think my mom ever cleaned our floor. Our floor was never dirty. And I have to say, I just feel so bad for my poor mom because our floor was always clean. I just never saw her cleaning it because she must have done it when I was not home, which I guess made a lot of sense. Also, a very small kitchen, so it probably didn't take very long. But another thing I never really thought about was cleaning your sink. I mean, I did clean it sometimes, but never as a rule and never really as like a foundation in the kitchen. But looking back, my grandma always had a really clean sink and I remember her scrubbing it. My grandma, 4'11", she's probably like 4'9" now because she is very small, but she would just be like scrubbing and deep in there and all of the things. But I can tell you as a former nurse, I understand how important cleanliness is for our health and to prevent infection. Because if you're washing vegetables in a sink that recently had raw chicken, you are risking food poisoning, and no one has time for that kind of nonsense. I remember being in the emergency department and dealing with gastrointestinal things. Nobody was happy. And grandma knew how important it was to keep your sink clean. You also don't need to go crazy with all sorts of supplies. I almost always use baking soda, and that's what my grandma would use, which does a super good job of physically removing the bacteria. And then I just rinse with water. You can use hot water sometimes. You can also add vinegar in if you want to complete that science experiment. But just the other day, actually, I was like, okay, the smell is weird. So I put baking soda down the sink, and then I will put down vinegar, and then I pour down hot water. And it really helps freshen up the sink. Nothing makes you feel more like an adult than actually caring whether or not your sink is clean. Now, as a quick bonus, sometimes the sink will get stained, and I will use Barkeeper's Friend to scrub out the stains, even though like the baking soda is great. But the key is just making this a daily habit and not something you do when the sink starts looking gross, and it just feels so good. Here's a phenomenon that was new to me. A lot of grandmas and moms insisted on closing the kitchen after dinner. Now, my own grandma, although the kitchen was always very clean after dinner, she was much more relaxed than this, and my mom was definitely more relaxed. But I did have a friend whose grandma and mom would not even let you look at the kitchen at the end of the day. Now, this seemed extreme to me, but then I had my own kitchen, and I totally see the genius behind this. Because when the kitchen is officially closed, it stays clean. No one's making late night snacks and leaving crumbs for you to find before breakfast, and then you're like, oh, now I gotta clean the kitchen in the morning. No one's grabbing a quick drink or leaving the glass on the counter. The kitchen, it stays reset for the next day. So for me right now, of course, with a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old in the house, this is pretty much just a fantasy that I can dream of one day. And honestly, you know that you're an adult when the idea of a kitchen that stays clean overnight sounds like pure fantasy. One year you're at the club, the next year you're dreaming of a clean kitchen. But I have actually developed a modified version where after dinner cleanup, the kitchen is closed for business. So anyone who wants something after that, they have to clean up after themselves immediately. And just last night, I think my son made himself a hamburger at like 2 in the morning. So it's good. It's amazing how this one rule prevents the morning kitchen disaster that we all hate. Here's probably the main thing that will keep your kitchen clean, and that is just making sure that all of the dishes are cleaned after every single meal. Now, my grandma would follow behind you, and she would gently remind you to put your dishes in the dishwasher. Or worse, she would do it herself, which was worse because it made you feel so guilty and so lazy. And if the dishwasher was full, she would wash them by hand, because you don't leave things to pile up. And I used to think this was excessive. I was the let it soak kind of person, which turns out soaking is just procrastination with extra steps. I thought, why not just load everything at the end of the day? But then I discovered that cleaning after every meal is actually less work, not more work. And when you let dishes pile up, food gets stuck on, you need more scrubbing, you maybe do need a bit of soaking, but then you forget, and the whole task, it just becomes overwhelming. Plus, when you clean as you go, you always have a clean kitchen to cook in. No more avoiding cooking because the kitchen's already a disaster. How many people skip lunch all of the time? And that might be why. Also, here's a lovely side note for all of you kids of all ages. After a big family meal, the grandma or the cook never cleans. Whenever we go to my mother-in-law's house or when we would go to my grandma's house, the cook does not clean. She has worked all day, so the kids, the nephews, the husbands, the nieces, everyone else will clean the kitchen. That's just a beautiful thing I have seen in many families, and it is a rule worth bringing back. Now, let's be honest about grandmas for a second here. We do need to address that not all grandmas were clean. We all know that one grandma or great aunt whose kitchen was, let's just call it, lived in. And some grandmas were pack rats. Some had kitchens that would make a health inspector pretty nervous. And some grandmas, honestly, they weren't fun to be around and not very nice. But the grandmas who did have these systems, their kitchens were incredible. They were the ones hosting every holiday, feeding everyone who walked through the door, and somehow making it look effortless. and bonus points if they stroked your hair while you laid your head in her lap. Here's something that goes against what I usually say on this channel, so just brace yourself. My grandma had everything. She even had a salad spinner in a box that she never used. Instead, she dried her lettuce on the tea towels. But what's great about this is that grandma did have everything you ever needed. You could borrow it from grandma. And that is one of the things I do say to people is you don't have to own everything. You can borrow and lend and, of course, take very good care of things. Now, she did have a very large kitchen and it was beautifully, beautifully organized. So while I don't necessarily recommend keeping everything you might possibly need someday, there was something wonderful about knowing that if you needed a specific tool or gadget, grandma probably had it. The key, though, and this is where a lot of people fall down, is that everything was organized and accessible, and it wasn't just stuffed into closets or cupboards or whatever. It was very, very neat. Now, if I look at my own drawers with perhaps, let's just say the tea towels and the cloths, I will fold them. Actually, my husband normally folds them because I hate touching microfiber. And yes, I know about microfiber, but we have a septic system, so I think it's a bit different. Anyway, I don't necessarily keep the drawers super neat. I throw things in there, folded, but my grandma's drawers were very neat. If she took something out, she made sure everything in there stayed neat and tidy. She had many things in her kitchen, and yet everything was organized. All of the bowls were nested together perfectly. Everything was in the perfect space. And honestly, I think this is great because when everything has a perfect place, everything goes back to that place and you can fit more in less space and actually find what you need when you need it. So I took this opportunity to neaten some of my kitchen drawers, including that one with the cloths and the tea towels, and to commit to putting everything back in the exact spot. And honestly, the difference is just remarkable. It just feels so much better. I feel more organized. Even though I normally feel like somewhat organized, this just is the icing on the cake, and it makes me think of my grandma. No more digging through the drawers looking for the can opener or the good scissors because everything is where it should be. This is another one that is not necessarily something I always recommend on this channel, but grandmas were masters at reusing containers, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But if you're getting a little long in the tooth, even me at this stage, I'm like, I have enough. I don't need to save things to reuse and recycle. But like pasta jars could become storage container. Your yogurt containers became leftover holders. Everything had a second life. Now my grandma, she had plenty of Tupperware and storage containers, so I think she did this a little bit less. And also, can we just quickly talk about Tupperware, how it became the Kleenex of food storage? Because everything is Tupperware, even when it is just like a yogurt container or something. And I don't even know where that came from because I used to be really confused when people would say that. And now people call me out on this channel about it, but it just is. Anyway, I do keep the lid from pasta jars because they work great on my canning jars for when I'm putting things in the fridge like salad dressings or whatever. But for the younger people who are just starting out and they don't have a lot of storage containers, this can be really practical. And the key is just being really selective about what you reuse and actually using it, and not just because keeping it because someday it might be useful. So recycle the rest of it. Here's a funny one, and that is that grandma would make sure that food was treated properly and she would not let nothing go to waste. She made sure everything was put in the fridge and that everything was, safely stored away. And that is why she used something like chip clips, which I know is a funny thing to bring up, but I wanted to mention it because she didn't want anything getting wasted. She didn't want any chips getting stale, crackers getting soft, anything else being wasted. And in my own house, I have to gently encourage my family members to not just like cram a box shut to actually clip the bag closed, because it also keeps my secret chips nice and crisp, and it prevents so much food waste, which is good. And I'm glad that my household members don't watch this, so don't tell them. Shh. This attention to proper food storage, it meant that groceries lasted longer and nothing got thrown away unnecessarily. Now, expiry dates were a little more optional as far as grandma was concerned. And in a lot of circumstances, if something like sour cream or something had expired 2 weeks ago, she'd smell it. And if there was no pink on it or visible bacteria, grandma would keep it. And I am not saying that my grandma would ever feed us any unsafe food. But she knew that sometimes we didn't need to stick to expiry dates too closely, especially for canned goods. She used her senses and her judgment and not just the date on the package. And this is definitely a use your own judgment territory, do your own research territory, but there is wisdom in not automatically throwing away food just because of an arbitrary date. You can do your own research again. Grandmas are in a league of their own sometimes though. Another thing is that my grandma would clean her floor on her hands and knees every single week minimum. There was no mop. And as I threw my mom under the bus earlier, we didn't have a mop either, so I'm pretty sure she was doing it on her hands and knees too. Now, I personally have fallen in love with cleaning my floors on my hands and knees, and I love to do it at least once a week. It just feels so good, and it is such a great deep cleaning routine. And I use this cleaner called Mint, so I will link that below. But what I realized is that it is very sore on my knees, and I started my knees were starting to get really dry, so I had to order knee pads for cleaning floors. Unfortunately, my Amazon recommendations, it now thinks I am a volleyball player, which I never was. I am not sporty, but I am loving how floor cleaning is no longer painful and it's even easier to get down there. There's just something so great about getting down on the floor and really cleaning the floors that you just cannot achieve with a mop. It is just so true. You can get into the corners, you can get along the baseboards, and you can really see what you're doing. Plus, it is surprisingly satisfying, and I am just a total hands and knees floor cleaning convert. So this must be the most important rule of all. And so often when we're young or our kids are young, we think we failed a recipe and that's a big problem, or a mess is a really big deal. Meanwhile, grandma understood that if something was broken, even if it was beyond repair, that's okay. She understood that things are not the important things in life. And at the same time, she knew that the kitchen was the heart of the home, and she took good care of her family and made delicious food that invited everybody in and just left us all with just incredibly warm, happy memories. Now, my own grandma, she lives in independent living right now, so she doesn't cook anymore. She's in her 90s, and she was a fantastic cook, a fantastic baker. I still like to ask her questions about recipes and stuff, and she is absolutely amazing. Every holiday, she would be in her kitchen doing all of the things, and I absolutely loved the coziness at her house, but also going into her neat and tidy kitchen and being yes, this is such a good example that she set. There was something so peaceful about being in that space that was both well loved and well maintained. After some thought, I realized that grandma's kitchen wisdom, it's not old fashioned, it is timeless. These aren't rules about perfection or impressing anyone. They're about creating a kitchen that actually works for your family. Your kitchen should be the heart of the home and not a source of stress. You know, I'm always saying on this channel that your home should be your medicine and not your poison. It should be clean enough to be safe, organized enough to be functional, and relaxed enough to be welcoming. Grandma knew that taking care of the kitchen meant taking care of the family. And in a world where we're constantly looking for the latest organizing, cleaning hack or product, maybe the best advice is still the simplest. Clean as you go, put things back where they belong, and remember that nothing is such a big deal that it can't be fixed with a little soap, water, and common sense. And you don't have to implement every single one of these rules, but I guarantee that if you pick even 2 or 3 and you stick with them, your kitchen will feel completely different. Start with cleaning your sink daily and see how that one small change ripples through everything else. But do you know who ironed their underwear and considered it normal? The 1950s housewives who had cleaning routines so thorough they made modern germaphobes look lazy, and somehow they still found time for morning and afternoon rest periods that we can only dream of today. So you can check out that video here. I hope something great happens for you today. Please like, subscribe, give us a hype, stay tidy and mighty. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.